So this is part 3 of my series of videos on my trip to learn about the Holocaust. So today we're going to get more into the history and into more of the details. So I just already did a video which I called a preview, where I was looking ahead to a trip organized by the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center of White Plains for high school history teachers to learn about the Holocaust by traveling to Germany and to Poland. The second video I did was something I called a prologue, which is kind of a gentle introduction to the places that we went to. Lots of pictures of some of the scenery. Today, I want to turn to more of the history. So where to start? So we could probably start by looking at some of the background, but I thought we would just start with 1933. Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. Shortly after that, the Nazis called for a boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. So the upshot of this was that it falls flat. People did not respond in the way that the Nazis had hoped. So two ways of looking at that. One is that the Nazis didn't have people willing to join in on their persecution of the Jews, but also not a lot of reaction. There could have been an opportunity to protest for people to push back, and that didn't happen either. So it just kind of falls flat, not a lot of response. People being told, don't go to this butcher, don't go to this tailor, don't go to this doctor. It's kind of inconvenient for people. They probably know if their doctor or, the store that they're going to is owned by a Jewish merchant or a Jewish business or a Jewish professional. So there's not a lot of reaction to it. Just the term Nazi, it's a shortening of National Socialism. The Nazis were formerly known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and people just informally refer to them as the Nazis. So giving you a little bit of the scope, there were lots of little minority groups, lots of different small religious groups that were targeted by the Nazis. So one example is the Jehovah's Witnesses. So in April 1935, Jehovah's Witnesses were targeted for persecution, for isolation by the Nazis. So as a group, they're not willing to swear allegiance to a state. They're not going to swear allegiance to a Führer. They're not willing to serve in the armed forces. So that means that they're suspect, that they're not going to be loyal to the state and to the Nazi party, and that's threatening to the Nazis. So they're targeted because of their outsider status, and they were taken away to concentration camps, a relatively small group, but they did not go without being noticed by the Nazis. And also looking at kind of the larger area, not just Germany, other countries around the area decided that they liked this approach. So in Hungary in 1938, they adopt some anti-Jewish laws, taking the example of what Germany did with the Nuremberg race laws in 1933. So they decide to do this on their own. So Germany invades Hungary in 1944. So this is not an occupied country at this point, but already they're starting to join in. So lots of other countries were inspired by and decided to follow this example. 1939, it's interesting to note that Adolf Hitler gives this public speech. He's speaking to his parliament, to the Reichstag. The Nazis are always claiming to be innocent of any bad intentions. So they're blaming the Jews for this coming war that everyone sees. So Hitler is saying the Jews are going to be starting a war, and if they do, we're going to annihilate the Jewish race in Europe. So just very publicly, there can't be any doubt about what Hitler's aims are. His methods and his plans are not going to be revealed, but his aims are going to be clear. Another part of the Nazi ideology, they basically wanted to create this pure superior race called the Aryan race. So they believed that they need to eliminate the weak, eliminate the disabled. So they set about taking people who are disabled, people who are mentally disabled or physically disabled. They wanted to first sterilize them, and then also to just outright kill them, to outright murder them. So the Nazis referred to this as euthanasia killings, which is a misnomer because there's no mercy involved. Nobody's asking you to end their life. The Nazis are deciding on their own. They're going to bring people into these centers deceptively, saying that they're going to be cared for. And then after they're there for a short time, the family gets a notice, oh, your loved one died suddenly. So the Nazis did this secretly, even though it was part of their larger ideology of creating this superior race. So tens of thousands of people were killed. Now, an interesting thing about this is that there were people who, as they learned about it, as the rumors began to spread, protested. And there was one prominent protest, which was an archbishop, a Catholic archbishop, who gave a number of sermons criticizing this and calling for it to end. So it kind of raises the question, were people in the Nazi era able, individual people able to stand up and protest what the Nazis were doing? Were people able to criticize the Nazi government? So it's not easy to criticize a dictator. It's not easy to challenge a regime like this. But people do that. There's been lots of dictatorships across history, and there have been people who decided in whatever way that they thought that they could to resist or to protest or to stand up. So there were some people who were willing to stand up to the Nazis. In this case, when they learned about these killings of people who were disabled, there was some prominent resistance. And the Nazi government said that they were going to stop it. So there was a call to stop the killings, and that probably happened for about 12 months, and then they quietly resumed them again. But it raises that interesting question. People were apparently willing in some instances to resist the Nazis, but not in others. So we went to the Wannsee estate, which is on this beautiful lake. It's this beautiful estate. So that was the location where a conference took place to plan the final solution. So this beautiful estate has been turned into an exhibition. It's a documentation center. There's lots of displays, lots of photos, and lots of documents. There's a whole library to tell you about this conference. So basically, by the time 1942 is coming around, there's been lots of mass killing of Jews, mass killings of opponents of the Nazi regime. And at this point, they've decided that it's not happening quickly enough. They're not killing enough people. So this conference is called to say that they want to kill all the Jews in Europe. Russia, England, the entire continent of Europe, wherever there are Jews, they want them to be killed. And what they're doing at this point is mass shootings. They're working people to death, they're starving people to death, and they're shooting people in mass shootings. And at this point, they feel like it's not going fast enough. They're not killing enough Jewish people. So this conference is a kind of a boring bureaucratic event with lots of mid-level people who are brought together to make the plan. And this is where they talk about a final solution. So this is people who are brought together to talk about train schedules and logistics. And what's the method of killing that we need? So they decide on gas chambers. So all this idea of how to set up these death camps and how to get people there, all those details are things that they set their mind to. So that was a really chilling place to go and to see how people just kind of sat around and talked about these details as if it was any other business meeting. So when the boycott failed in 1933, the Nazis decided that they needed to step back and they needed to have some kind of a strategy, that they needed some kind of a psychologically informed way of approaching how to get the general population to accept the idea of persecuting Jews. So just a few weeks after that failed boycott, there's a law that's put in place that says that Jews are excluded from sports groups. And then there's a few weeks later, there's a law that says that Jews can no longer participate in the chess association. So these are kind of small steps. They're kind of random little isolated things, but it's a strategy to push forward step by step. So there's no mass protests. There's no huge demonstration. There's no outcry because Jews can't play in the chess tournaments. But what happens? The general population sees that these things are happening, and they may have feelings about it. They may think, this is a small thing, but as a principle, it's wrong to be, targeting people like this. But what happens? Nothing. So even if there are people who are feeling uncomfortable about this, it's not something that they want to support or participate in. it happens, and people then feel like this is the way things are, this is normal, and they don't see a big outcry. They don't see resistance. And so that's a step, and then there's another step after that. There's a new automotive club that's being formed, and so they decide, well, we're not going to allow any Jews to belong to this. There's a law that requires Jews who don't have Jewish-sounding names to add a Jewish-sounding name. So your name is not Jewish enough, so now you have to add Israel if you're a male, and Sarah if you're a woman. So it's a way of recognizing that Jews are very assimilated in many parts of the society, and they want to end that. They want to isolate them. They want to make them separate. If there are streets that are named after Jews, now there's a law saying we want those streets to be renamed. There's a park in Berlin where they said we have to have separate park benches. The park bench that has a yellow stripe is going to be for the Jews. This sounds very much like Jim Crow of the southern United States. And there were, in fact, Nazi lawyers who, before all of this happened, went to the United States to learn about how segregation was enacted by law because they wanted to find legal methods for enacting their policies. And they studied how it was done in the United States. This concept of Aryanism, this superior race, is being developed, is being created. And there's a law that says that Aryan and non-Aryan children, you can't play together. Radios were confiscated from Jewish homes in 1939. Later that year, Jews are giving a curfew. They're told that they can't be out after a certain time. Journalists have to prove that for themselves and for their spouses, that they are Aryan back to the 1800s. In 1936, this law is passed. In that same year, they pass a law saying that they no longer want Jews to convert to Christianity. So this kind of shows you that the Nazis are trying to create this Aryan notion. They're trying to create this notion that Jews are a separate race. So prior to this, anti-Semitism or hate of Jews was based on the fact that they were Jewish, based on the fact of their religion, based on the fact of their beliefs, based on the fact that they weren't Christian, based on whatever practices the Jews had at the time. The Nazis want to innovate that to say, no, they're not a separate religion, they're a separate race. There's a biological difference that, this racist theory that says that people are different races, which is a fallacy. There's no science behind that. The Nazis are advancing this idea that a different race from among the races is the Jewish race. So they want to tell Christians that they can no longer convert to Jews. And of course, the church wasn't happy with this. In 1937, there was a law passed that Jews cannot receive academic degrees. So already back in 1933, they're told that they can't serve in civil service positions, they can't serve in certain professions. And now they're being told if you're preparing for a profession, you can't get that degree anymore. Telephones from Jewish homes, they were cut off in 1940. A year later, Jews are told that they can't use public telephones either. Also that year, Jews are no longer allowed to buy soap or shaving cream. They're being denied their basic hygiene requirements. In 1941, Jews are no longer allowed to leave. So Jews are being rounded up and pushed into ghettos, and then they're being, extracted from those ghettos, taken east to concentration camps. And if anyone's thinking that they're going to leave the country on their own, now there's a law in 1941, you're no longer allowed to leave on your own. Another silly random law, 1942, Jews and Poles are not allowed to purchase cakes. Jews are forbidden from buying newspapers in 1942. So how do you kind of relay this history? How do you explain to people the way in which this kind of creeped along to create this society where people accepted the idea of persecuting Jews? Early on in 33, not a lot of people were going to support that, were going to participate in it. So the Nazis figure out this way to gradually get people used to the idea of excluding, of isolating, of persecuting a certain portion of the population. So there's one town, I'm going to say the name is Schöneberg. I'm probably not saying that right. A little neighborhood in Berlin referred to as the Jewish Switzerland. It had a large Jewish population before the Nazis. This community decided that they needed to do something to acknowledge that there had been a Jewish population, that this had been a Jewish neighborhood, and to kind of tell the story. So how do you do that? So they decided to take all these little incremental laws that were passed and to create around the neighborhood these little pictograms. So as you walk around the neighborhood, there are these 80 odd signs. You're just walking down the street and there's a lamppost, there's a signpost, and there's this sign. So in this example, there's some musical notes. So they're all kind of pictograms that are kind of a mystery. It's kind of a little bit of a riddle. You walk around to the other side and it explains what it is. So this sign is telling you that in 1933, there was a law passed that Jews were excluded from choral societies. So all around the neighborhood, these different signs. There's another sign that has some school books, and you wonder what's that? And you look around the other side, 1938, Jewish children may no longer attend public schools. The sign in this picture here is an envelope. So this one was a little different. You walk around to the other side and you see a letter that someone wrote. The time has come, tomorrow I have to go. Naturally, very hard, I will write to you. This is someone who's been given an order to deport in January of 1942, and this sign is telling you about that person. Here's a sign telling you about the law saying that Jews can't use phones. This is telling you about the way in which the names had to be changed. So your name is Paul or Peter or Anna or Inga. You now have to add something to let people know that you're Jewish. So this is a little pictogram with a little explanation on the back telling you that that happened in 1938. Here's a sign that says bank, and you look around and it tells you about in 1938 how Jews were required to declare their personal income and property. So as we look at ways in which the history is being remembered, this is the campus of a university, Humboldt University in Berlin. And as you're walking across the plaza, there's a piece of glass in the ground. And when you look down into that glass, you see there's a room underneath there. And it's a room that is just stark white, empty bookshelves. And then the plaque next to it tells you that in 1933, as the Nazis were coming to power, they began burning books. And I think it was May of 1933 on this location, they went into the offices of different college professors that they didn't approve of what they were teaching, the history that they were teaching, or the explaining something about gay and lesbian sexuality, or another thing that they didn't want people to be learning about or talking about or printing books about, and the books were gathered here and a great fire was started. So as people are walking around Germany, they'll see different little memorials and different little ways of explaining the history that happened right where you're walking. So we went to a little kind of a suburban area of Berlin, Grunwald, and there's a train station there in Grunwald where they're trying to relate the history that back in the Nazi era, Jews were marched to this little commuter train station, loaded up onto the trains and taken away to camps. So there used to be a whole series of tracks there, and now there's just a couple of tracks for a smaller station. So this used to be one of the tracks, I think it was track 17. They've left it in place as a memorial, and they put these iron plaques alongside of the tracks. And what this does is it tells you the date and the number of people who are loaded on to a train and where they were sent to. So this is telling you that in March of 1945, 18 Jewish people were brought to the station, they were loaded onto a train, and they were taken away to a camp. So there's a long series of these metal plaques. This one is October 1941, 1,251 Jews taken away to, I think it's Lodz. So this is the station as it looks today. This kind of reminds me of Scarsdale. It's not a big plaza or something. It's just a little tight little neighborhood. There's houses and there's businesses and there's this little train station there. It's not an isolated area. It's not a kind of a big metropolitan area. It's just a little neighborhood. This train station had one of the very first efforts to publicly memorialize the Holocaust. A group of church women in the 1970s got a couple of railroad ties and put them down as a little exhibit with a little plaque explaining how this is a place from which Jews were loaded onto trains in the middle of the neighborhood. People could see them being loaded onto the trains and taken away. Another place we went to was Sachsenhausen. Sachsenhausen was a concentration camp. And we saw this cell, which is the cell where Martin Niemöller was held. So Martin Niemöller was a Lutheran pastor who was not an early resistor. He early on was a supporter of the Nazis. And as time went on, he came to resist the Nazis, and he was arrested and he was jailed for many years. He survived the war. Not all the people who were taken to concentration camps, of course, survived. But Martin Niemöller was one of those people who managed to survive the war. So Martin Niemöller is known for this poem. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I used to think that this was someone kind of imagining the way people might have thought at the time, but this is actually his story. He actually did not resist what the Nazis were doing until it was directed towards him. This is a scene from Sachsenhausen. So this concentration camp and the other camp that we saw, parts of it are still there and parts of it are no longer there. I really don't know what to say about it other than it's a very unique experience to walk through a place like that. As you enter, many of the camps have this on the gate or over the gate: work shall set you free, which is just a kind of a tortured kind of a joke or something. So there are four main memorials that have been created very much in the center of Berlin. First one is the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. So these memorials have been made just in the past 25 years or so. So you have these concrete slabs, which are about the size of a human body, I guess. So they're in a very much of a grid pattern, but they're different heights. And the ground kind of dips as you're walking through them. So you start kind of like, as this gentleman, you're kind of looking out over them. And as you walk towards the center, you are lower and lower, and the slabs are getting higher and higher around you. This is some members of my group as we were walking through. This is kind of when you're in the center. So it's very much a grid. It's very much a straight line as you're walking through. It's just the slabs are slightly different heights. They start out low and they get taller, but they're not uniform. It is a nearly 5-acre site. There are 2,700 slabs, what they call stelae, and the steles are 7 feet long and 3 feet wide. So this is right in the heart of Berlin. It's right next to the Brandenburg Gate. It's right next to the American Embassy. So that says something about the commitment of the country, the nation, to give this such prominence. Another one of the memorials, the most recent one, I think, is to the Roma and Sinti. So the Roma and Sinti are people that historically have been referred to as gypsies, but that's not the preferred name anymore. So you have this beautiful reflecting pool. In the center, each day is a flower that's placed there. You see these stones that are lined up around it. Some of the stones have the names of camps where the Roma and the Sinti people were sent to. Another one of the memorials is to the people who were quote unquote euthanized, people who were murdered because they were disabled. So this memorial has a long, long blue wall, glass wall, and in front of it is a panel with the whole story and lots of details about the history of how they were treated. This memorial is located at the site of a hospital that was used for people who the Nazis wanted to kill. Another memorial is to the homosexuals who were persecuted under National Socialism. So this is in kind of a strange little corner in the park. Again, it's very much in the center of Berlin. This is a very large park that's in the center of Berlin. But this monument is kind of tucked away in the park in a little corner that's easy to not notice. It's a big block. It's kind of impenetrable when you kind of see it. So you have to approach it and you have to look inside, and there's a video that's running inside. So this is one of the more recent memorials, and it is commemorating the many people who were persecuted, who were killed under National Socialism because of their sexual identity. This is a area that was recently discovered after the Berlin Wall came down. They began to examine the area and they discovered that they were the remains of the SS headquarters. As they excavated and looked down, they decided to make this into a place where the story is told. So they call this the topography of terror. And there are different panels that tell you the story. This is one panel that tells you about the Summer Olympics, and that's Jesse Owens, who of course won a gold medal at the Olympics in Berlin. And there's a picture of him with a German athlete, and they became friends. But famously, of course, Hitler was mortified that an African American could do so well at the Olympics. This panel talks about the November pogrom, which has sometimes been called Kristallnacht, which in 1938 was the beginning of the violent attacks on Jewish businesses and synagogues and homes. So you have this long outdoor corridor with all these panels telling the story, explaining the propaganda techniques, explaining the laws that were passed, explaining the history and the events. In addition to this is a newer building that's been built. So there's also an indoor exhibit as well, which is quite large and quite extensive. So that was all Berlin. I just have one slide to conclude here, which is a slide from Poland. So this is Warsaw. Warsaw had a much, much larger Jewish population than Germany. Germany comparatively did not have many Jews at all, but the largest concentration of Jews in Europe at the time was Poland. So we went to go see Warsaw and we went to go see Krakow. So Warsaw had, when the Germans invaded, when the Nazis invaded, they concentrated all the Jews into a small portion of the city. They packed people into small apartments in a way that was very unhealthy. They limited the amount of food that was brought in. They had them working very hard, long hours at very difficult work, in an effort really to kill them by working them to death and by starving them to death. And then they began to ship people off to concentration camps as well. So the walls are no longer there, but they decided to mark out throughout the city where the walls used to be. And there are different plaques along the route to tell you different parts of the story. This was an artist, a sculptor, who was living in Poland at the time of the Nazi rise. So there was this massive effort to remove children from the Nazi-occupied areas or the areas that were being threatened by the Nazis, called the Kindertransport. So Jewish families decided that their children could no longer be safe in Poland, in Germany, in the areas that the Germans were threatening. So this gentleman took a train ride from Gdansk, Poland, through Berlin to Amsterdam, and then finally to London. So many, many children were evacuated by their parents because they did not want them to be caught in the way of the Nazi invasion. So he has since created sculptures to commemorate this transport. So he has one in Gdansk, he has this one in Berlin, he has another one in Amsterdam, and then most recently, I think he put one in London. The one in Berlin is actually different from the others because it has two sets of children going in opposite directions. One set of children, it's called the Train to Life, and the other set of children is called the train to death. So that at this train station, Friedrichstrasse in Berlin, this commemorates that there were children who were sent off to camps, and there were children whose parents got them out of Berlin in time. Maybe those children never saw their families again, but they were adopted by families in London and wherever else they ended up. So that's the end of this segment. I'll have another segment again soon. Thank you for watching.